I'm willing to bet money that you haven't heard most of the writing tips in this video, but if you apply them to your fiction, they will revolutionize your writing. These 8 famous authors offer these tips not only to beginning writers, but these are also for, seasoned writers with a few books under their belt. Let's jump right into number 1, improve your style with burnt tongue. So Gordon Lish was one of the most famous editors of the last 100 years. His most famous client was Raymond Carver, but he had this phrase that he told authors to do where he's like, write in burnt tongue. Now, what he meant by burnt tongue is that you want to deliberately warp your sentences. He says to make your prose sound raw or strange or off or wrong or weird. He wants you to screw up your syntax. But why does he tell you to do this? Well, I think messing up the way a character speaks or messing up your sentences in some way reflects the emotional or psychological state of your character. This really reflects how a character would think when they are under a lot of stress or when they are experiencing really strong emotions, or maybe they're from a different part of the country, or maybe they don't know English that well. So how do you write burnt tongue well? Well, I'll give you 3 quick examples. You can reorder the words or the syntax in a sentence. You can do something simple like dropping all the articles, the thes, out of the sentence. Or you could just write a lot of fragments. And a good exercise for you to try is to write a paragraph where someone receives bad news. And first, write it in normal syntax, completely normal sentences. Next, try to screw up your syntax in some way. Try to use that burnt tongue. Use fragments, drop sentences off halfway, and see whether it better reflects their emotional state when they receive that news. Also, because you're watching this video, you have an invitation to join BookFox LAB. BookFox LAB is an intense mentoring relationship where you learn the BookFox method for writing your novel, you get weekly feedback on your writing, and you also get one-on-one coaching. It's not just me, it's not a one-man John show. I've also brought on a couple of different coaches who are New York Times bestselling authors and who have won a lot of big literary prizes. They're going to help me in this process of helping you. So take the step today to join before all the spots get filled. There is a link in the description and it is calling your name. Now, this next piece of writing advice that we're going to look at is number 2, avoid weak blonde prose. And wait, I should also say, no offense to you blondes out there, this isn't my phrase. This is Nabokov's, okay? Blame him. Now, what is weak blonde prose? It is when you write your story in the voice of a child. And this was coined by Vladimir Nabokov. He always told authors you don't want to constrain yourself by the vocabulary and the thoughts of a kid when you're writing a book. A 6-year-old narrator can't use sophisticated metaphors or analyze the world in any way. Now, I understand what Nabokov was saying. His strength was his ornate, sophisticated prose. So, of course, he didn't want to jettison that and limit himself to the way a 7 or 8-year-old would talk. But I'd offer a little counterpoint that sometimes that form of limitation can actually be a strength in your writing. That when you limit yourself, that encourages creativity rather than squelching creativity. I think of a book like Room by Emma Donoghue. That has 5-year-old Jack narrating it. And it's the perfect narrator because honestly, we probably couldn't bear it if the mother was narrating this story about being trapped in a room. The kid's childlike wonder makes the story endurable. Or look at a book like Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. This is a book where he's really dumb in the beginning. He can't even spell things properly. Then he takes the drugs, he gets super intelligent, and then goes back to being dumb again. This is a book where the pleasure comes from a character who can't narrate the story very well, and then we get to see his transformation. Or look at The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon. Christopher is autistic, but we actually enjoy his different way of viewing the world. He ends up being a very charming narrator. But I do think I agree with Nabokov that you need to go in with wide eyes when you choose to limit yourself to a character who can't express themselves very well. You need to make that decision with full knowledge of everything you're not going to be able to do in the book. And if you want a little exercise, try a vocabulary restriction exercise. Write a whole page filled with words that only a 5-year-old could use. If you do that and it's really easy, then hey, go for it. Write a whole novel that way. If you find it very, very difficult, that's probably not the right voice for you. Let's move on to the next tip, which is a brilliant one. It is number 3, avoid abject naturalism at all costs. This tip comes from an author named Frank Conroy. He's absolutely incredible. You should absolutely read his writing if you haven't already. And what abject naturalism is, as Conroy describes it, is just a listing of sort of the minutiae of details of everyday life. Washing dishes, or setting a table, or picking weeds out of a garden. And what he says is, don't get caught up in the weeds of those details. If you slow down too much and you have a whole paragraph describing the suds and the drips of water in the sink, then the reader's gonna get bored with that very quickly. So what do you do in a situation like this? Well, you have three options. One, you can skip it entirely. You really don't have to detail the dishwashing or the minutia of everyday life. Two, you can slot it in as a dependent clause. After washing the dishes, he did what? And then just go on to what the real action is in the story. Or three, you could just summarize it. He washed the dishes, and then great, you got it out of the way really, really quickly, and now you can move on to whatever the next step of the story is. But I also have to say that you could also get abject naturalism with stuff which is really exciting. It doesn't have to be boring like dishwashing. Peter F. Hamilton has a sci-fi novel called Pandora's Star, and in that book he has like a 30-page section where a woman goes paragliding over a volcano. Sounds exciting, right? Sounds like, yeah, I'm down for it. But after 30 pages, you're like, the details are overwhelming. There's way too much of them. I could have used, say, I don't know, a page or two of paragliding. Now, are there exceptions to this rule? I mean, yes, of course. I think of some high literary authors like Marcel Proust in Search of Lost Time, and the Norwegian memoirist Karl Ove Knausgård. He wrote My Struggle. And their shtick, if I can call it a shtick, their shtick is to write an overwhelming abundance of details to sort of immerse you in the environment. Now, they managed to make it classic literature, but I have to say that your mileage using this technique probably would vary, and that you should probably tamp down the amount of abject naturalism in your storytelling. I do think a really good exercise is a compression exercise where you take a whole paragraph of your writing where something's happening and try to compress it down into a single sentence. It doesn't mean it's always the right decision to do that in your story, but just, see how it looks, see if it's right at that place in your storyline. Now let's get to our fourth very practical, very wise writing tip. It is try insistence, not repetition. So Gertrude Stein was a very famous American novelist and poet, and she didn't like the word repetition. You might also have some sort of grudge against the word repetition, maybe because, I don't know, English teachers sort of banged you on the head with like, stop repeating same words, like use a thesaurus. And that's actually a terrible idea, don't do that. But Gertrude Stein took the idea of repetition and said, no, 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 no. It is insistence. Think about when you repeat something in a certain story, you're just insisting upon its reality. You are merely emphasizing it. So for an example of this, look at American Dirt by Janine Cummins. So in this scene, a woman is afraid that her journalist husband has just been killed by the cartel. And then she gets closer and realizes, oh, it's not him. Wait, no, not. It was not him. It was not him. There's so much relief that's coming out of her when she realizes this isn't my husband. Like, yes, someone has been killed, but at least it's not him. It's not him. It's not him. Now, this paragraph is not redundant. It beautifully captures the character's experience of feeling relief. Now, you might ask me, okay, John, but how many times would I really repeat something? Usually 3 to 5 times is about the right amount. Anything more than that and you're exhausting the readers. Anything less than that, you're not really creating a pattern. A second question you might ask is, does it have to be the exact same words? And the answer is no. Stein would say that insistence allows for a certain amount of variation, like that example in American Dirt. So here's a fun exercise. Try having a character who says a word or a phrase repeatedly in a way that the reader starts to doubt whether they're telling the truth. An example of this would be Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane, where he starts describing all the soldiers that stayed and actually fought as imbeciles. They're imbeciles. They're absolutely imbeciles. And you start to realize he's trying to justify in his own mind why he was a coward and ran away. And the way that he does that is by insulting these other guys. This next writing tip is a mouthful, but it's actually a very useful term. It is number 5, defamiliarization. The guy who originally came up with this phrase was this Russian critic and author. His name was Viktor Shklovsky. But the whole concept of defamiliarization means when you are writing, you're trying to take things that are very familiar to your reader and make them seem strange. Make the reader see it as if for the first time. And you know what this feels like, because sometimes, you know how you say a word sometimes and you've said it too many times, and so the word gets sort of detached from its actual meaning? Plan. Good old Ted Lasso. Who doesn't like Ted Lasso? And here's another example from Kurt Vonnegut. He called New York City the National Skyscraper Park. I love that little reframing where when you look at the whole city as a skyscraper park, it just makes you see New York City in a new light. Now, why do you want to do this? Is because Anais Nin said that when we're familiar with something, we stop truly seeing it. What you're trying to do to your reader is say, hey, wake up. Like, even in this world that you're familiar with, you should be amazed by it. You should be surprised by it. Now, you can also do this writing technique in the opposite way, where you're trying to make the things that are very, very strange feel familiar. And honestly, you see this a lot in fantasy and sci-fi, because then the role of the author is to take these crazy worlds and try to make it so the reader can understand what's happening. That's a hard task. Quick sci-fi example, you take a story like Dune, and we're set on this arid world with people harvesting spice and people harvesting all their internal liquids to make sure that they can survive in the dryness, and that strange environment is made familiar through storytelling and through details. And a fun exercise, if you want to try this technique, is just try to make the reader see a common object, like, say, I don't know, a light switch, as if seeing it for the very first time. Make them wonder about it, or make them like, oh, yeah, that is kind of miraculous. Now, I think this next writing tip is probably one that you've heard before, but we all need reminders because it's such a sneaky, insidious little devil of writing. It is number 6, the plague of filter words. So John Gardner, the famous essayist and novelist of 55 books, 55, those are some serious numbers, Gardner. He answered this question in The Art of Fiction. What are common pitfalls that writers face? And one of the things he said was the unnecessary filtering of images through character perceptions. His idea was that you just want to go to the actual object or the actual smell, rather than filtering it through words like he saw, she smelled, she heard, he felt. That creates distance between the reader and the actual objects or actual smells. So let's run a little thought experiment. What would happen if we took famous lines of literature and added on filter words? F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby. I realized we beat on, like boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. No. Start it right at, so we beat on. Or Ernest Hemingway, A Farewell to Arms. He noticed how the world breaks everyone, and afterward, many seem strong at the broken places. Oh, it's so much weaker with that he noticed. No, start with the world breaks everyone. Or Jane Austen in Pride and Prejudice. She believed it was a truth universally acknowledged. No. You're killing me here. No, just start with, it is a truth universally acknowledged. Now, let me just say, you don't always want to avoid filtering. This is one of those rules, actually like probably most of the rules I give in these videos, that you want to apply, say, I don't know, 80% of the time. Here are 2 times when you actually need filtering words. One, to show limited or unreliable narrators. I thought I heard footsteps. We don't know whether this person is correct or not. We don't know whether they're imagining it. Or 2, it's a good way to establish point of view. Sarah noticed that the door was ajar. Lets us know, oh, we're in Sarah's POV right now, rather than in some sort of omniscient narrator POV. Let us now jump into writing tip number 7, furnishing the world on a budget. This tip comes from Robin Wilson, and she said that when you are describing a world in a novel, you can't describe everything. No, you have to furnish your world on a budget. You have to point out this thing, and this thing, and this thing, these 3 things, and that has to symbolize the room as a whole. That is because, as writers, we're not making movies. A movie can capture everything in a room in a second. That's how long it takes. But if you were to do that in fiction, you'd end up writing 2-3 pages, and the reader would throw your book across the room rather than continue reading. So because you are limited in the amount of details you can give in a scene to help us get a sense of what it looks like, I'm going to give you these 2 tips. One, you can always just give a general impression of a room. It smelled like this, or it was the type of room where you felt like you might be tortured later. Ew. A second technique that you can use is simply just give the most important or salient detail in that room. Say you walk into a different boy's bedroom and there is a bong on top of the dresser. That is a very different characterization. Or maybe the same characterization. You decide. And the last and final writing tip of this video is number 8, killing your purple prose. So purple prose, we think it's a modern term. It's actually not. We can go back to its original source, which is Horace in 19 AD. Yeah, around the time of Christ, where he talked about flowery ornamental prose that doesn't really serve the purpose of the storyline. He said overly ornate patches stand out just as much from your story as if on your clothing you had sewn a big purple patch. Now, purple prose doesn't mean you can't write beautiful language. Absolutely not. It's that when you write beautiful language, you have to ask yourself, does this serve the story? Does this serve the reader? The problem is not elegance. The problem really is the writer is being self-indulgent. So let's look at some wonderfully hideous examples of purple prose so you can groan along with me. The scintillating, crystalline tears of ethereal sorrow cascaded melodiously down her alabaster cheeks like liquid diamonds. Or you could write, tears rolled down her face. Or something in between those, right? It's not an either or. There's lots of different gradations, but one is clearly purple prose, one is very simple language. Here's another example. The cerulean firmament was bejeweled with coruscating stellar orbs. Gosh, I can barely read that. That's hard to say. Instead, you could just say the sky was filled with bright stars. Or write something in between those that's slightly poetic but doesn't try so hard. Now, if you're worried that you've written some purple prose in your manuscript, I have a 3-question med pack that might save you from this issue. 1, what would happen if I deleted this whole thing or trimmed it down to a single sentence instead of a paragraph? If you don't really lose anything, well, you might be writing purple prose. 2, does this writing match my character's voice and the tone of the story? If you're being consistent, then maybe that's just the tone of the story and it's right because that's how this character thinks and speaks. And 3, am I trying to impress or to communicate? Impressing is more about you as a writer. Communicating is more about the reader and what they need and what they want. Hey, click that link below to check out Bookfox Lab. It really will transform your writing and help you so much on your writing journey. And I hope you have a good writing day.